I'm Cristián Orrego. I work as Director of Forensic Programs at the Human Rights Center, University of California, Berkeley. I joined the center 2 years ago after working for 11 years as a forensic geneticist at the DNA lab of the State of California Department of Justice. And that is where the story I'm about to tell you began. As many of us know, El Salvador underwent a civil war from 1980 to 1992, a very cruel civil war, where many families were separated from their children during the turmoil of the war. Many of them are still alive in that they were given out in adoptions to families within El Salvador, but many also abroad, in the United States, Canada, Europe, and Australia. At the end of the war in 1992, the families who had lost their children realized that their children were still alive. They came together and established an organization called Probúsqueda, which means pro-search of the missing children of El Salvador. That organization was established in 1994, 2 years after the end of the war, under the leadership of a Jesuit Father John de Cortina, who passed away at the end of 2005. He was a scientist as well, and knew that was the dawn of the use of DNA for the human identification in 1994. And he approached, in that year, Physicians for Human Rights, which is located in Boston, to ask for help in the confirmation of a child or a young man that the Probúsqueda had found, to make sure that that person belonged to the family they thought he belonged. And Probúsqueda used DNA evidence from time to time to do that kind of confirmation. The person has been found, a family is likely to be the biological family of the young person or young adult, and DNA evidence would confirm or not, as the case would be. I was at the Department of Justice in 2003 when I met, and several of us at the lab met, John de Cortina, the leader of Probúsqueda. And that's how a group of us at the Department of Justice proposed to Probúsqueda that DNA evidence could be even more powerful than just allowing for confirmation or exclusion of kinship between a person and her probable family. And that much more fruitful would be the use of DNA evidence by going back to the families of Probúsqueda, about 550 of them at the time, re-interviewing them, interviewing them, and obtained the family tree of that family, and obtain samples from the closest relatives of the missing child, to have then those transform into DNA profiles that would be put into a database of family references. What would this allow from there on? And Probúsqueda received the first version of their family database profiles of family references in 2006. That would allow that when a person is found and no evidence exists for whose family might be his or hers, to then use a computer program to then find out where there might be a match between the profile of that person and any of the families in the reference database. Well, all the promises, and then some, of the approach that was proposed to Probuscia in 2003 have borne fruit. In that there have been a number of what's called cold hit cases, where, as I mentioned a moment ago, the person is likely a child from one of the families in the reference database of DNA profiles of families. And a match has been found that way, where no evidence prior to that match would suggest that that person belonged to that family. Of course, following that match, there is further investigation to make sure that context and other information related to the child or the young person and the family do make sense. In a kinship report, both prior knowledge as well as DNA evidence are combined into a conclusion, a statistical conclusion. But to our surprise, there has been another fruit that has come out of this approach, which is to realize that the registry of families of Probuscia that are included in the reference database of family profiles, that registry is most likely incomplete. And that has come about only by DNA evidence in the following form. Probuscia has been quite successful in finding the young adults who were separated from their families during the war and were adopted by families both in El Salvador as well as abroad. We obtained their profiles, but many a time we are not finding a match to the reference database of DNA profiles from the families which are in the registry of families who have come forward to Probuscia and declared the absence, the missing child. What is that telling us? That we have an incomplete database of family references. So from that DNA evidence now, it has become very evident that Probuscia needs to go back and find more families who lost their children during the war. So faced with this predicament that there is an incomplete registry of families who lost their children during the war, where are they? Where are the missing families? Well, if you consider that, and according to census data that we've gathered from census in this country, more than 118,000 families migrated, left El Salvador during the war to come to the United States and Canada. Those families, among those families, there might be many that prior to their departure from El Salvador might have lost a child, might have become separated from a child, from abductions, from military massacres, and such. Those families don't know about the existence of Probuscia because they are located here in this country, in Canada, in Europe, and Probuscia is not well known abroad. There are reasons to believe that Probuscia is not as well known as it should be, even in El Salvador. So now the campaign, the work that we now have in front of us, and that's a very important part of the collaboration of the Human Rights Center at UC Berkeley with Probuscia, is to do an outreach campaign in this country to reach the families who left during the years of the war, inform them that Probuscia exists, and to come forward, and then to allow us then to bring DNA evidence to fulfill its promise. Probuscia, there is something very unique about Probuscia as one of the many human rights organizations that exist the world over. of families that have come together to look for their missing loved ones from wars, conflicts of the 70s and 80s and into the 90s in Central America and Chile, as well as other areas of the world of which there are many, sadly, so many examples. And Probuskia is somewhat unique in that it decided to bring in its own scientific capacity, in this case, the use of DNA evidence to assist in the search and confirmation of kinship as young adults have been found. As such, Probuskia has brought into El Salvador an aspect of science, of forensic science, that El Salvador will badly need when it decides to undertake the search for the missing dead, as thousands of people lost their lives and they were buried in surreptitious graves, clandestine graves during the war. And El Salvador hasn't yet started the search for those missing. And of course, at that time, science will be needed. And Probuskia would have, in the meantime, begun to seed, other organizations as well as the government into what it has to do to gain the capacity to use the tools of science in the search to come for the missing in El Salvador.